The bus screeched to a halt in front of high school, its faded bricks and graffiti-streaked walls standing as a silent warning to anyone entering. The morning sun hit the large windows, glinting off shattered panes in places where students had thrown rocks or baseballs over the years. A low hum of voices drifted through the air, the chatter of teenagers moving between classes, the laughter of those confident in their social dominance, the whispers of those trying to stay invisible. Among them, a new presence stepped off the bus, small in stature yet radiating a quiet strength that drew attention, whether anyone realized it or not. Ward adjusted the strap of her backpack and stepped onto the cracked pavement, taking a moment to breathe in the chaos. She wasn't the kind of girl who demanded attention, nor did she want it. Her style was simple jeans, a plain hoodie and worn sneakers, but there was something about the way she moved that made her impossible to ignore. She didn't hurry, yet she didn't linger either. Every step was purposeful, measured, controlled. Eyes followed her as she made her way toward the entrance, the subtle shift in her demeanor almost imperceptible, yet it sent a ripple through the crowd of students. She had transferred from a private military academy in Maryland, a place where discipline wasn't just a rule but a way of life. Had grown up with strict routines, early mornings, and training exercises that had left most of her peers exhausted before breakfast. She had learned to observe, to assess, to anticipate lessons ingrained by her father, a retired Navy SEAL who believed in preparation over panic, control over chaos. To the casual observer, she looked like any other girl stepping into a new school, but inside, every fiber of her being was alert, analyzing. The corridors, the cliques, the subtle hierarchies, she noticed it all. The first whispers came almost immediately. "Who's the new girl?" one boy muttered to his friend as they leaned against a locker, arms crossed. "She looks different," the other replied, squinting. Not many people came to high without bringing a bit of baggage, usually in the form of attitude, money, or a reputation earned somewhere else. Had none of those things. And yet, there was a kind of aura about her that made students pause, even if they couldn't quite place why. Quiet strength, they would later realize, was far more intimidating than arrogance. As navigated the hallways, she passed groups of students clustered in tight circles. Some moved aside politely, sensing she wasn't someone to push. Others stared, intrigued or perhaps suspicious. And then the first truly dangerous pair of eyes locked onto her. Briggs, a senior with a sharp tongue and an even sharper temper, led a group infamous for controlling high through fear. Her reputation preceded her, the girl who humiliated new students, who instilled terror with a single glare, who prided herself on her ability to dominate any space she entered. And her friends watched like predators assessing prey. Noticed them too, of course. She didn't flinch, she didn't speed up, she didn't acknowledge their presence more than necessary. Instead, she simply calculated. Body language, positions, potential escape routes. The way shoulders tensed when approached. The subtle shifting of the group to block her path. Every movement communicated intention, aggression, anticipation, superiority, and absorbed it all, storing the information like a mental map she could use later if needed. She didn't want trouble, but she wasn't afraid of it either. Fear was something she had trained to suppress. Control was what mattered. The bell rang, its harsh tone cutting through the murmur of voices. Students scrambled to their next classes, backpacks swinging and shoes squeaking against the worn linoleum. Adjusted hers and moved with the flow of the crowd, heading toward her first period, English. Her teacher, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, greeted her with a kind smile. "You must be welcome. Let me know if you need anything." Nodded politely, slipping into a seat near the back of the classroom, her posture straight, her eyes scanning the room even as she pretended to focus on the syllabus. Observation was as much a survival tool as anything else. But the whispers had started. Even in the classroom, they were unavoidable. "She's quiet, weird, I wonder if she's tough." Didn't respond, she didn't need to. Words were useless unless backed by action. She learned that lesson years ago. In her previous school, the most powerful students had quickly realized that underestimating her was a mistake, one they wouldn't live to repeat. Hai hadn't met a student like her yet, and she knew it. The potential storm was brewing, and she was ready to face it if it came. Lunchtime arrived quickly, and the cafeteria was a sea of noise and chaos. Moved carefully, holding her tray, choosing a table near the edge of the room. She kept her head down, eating quietly, but even here attention lingered, and her friends were watching from across the room, smirking. The leader whispered something and noticed the subtle nods of agreement among the others. Plans were being formed, as she had predicted. The question was whether they would underestimate her. Most people did. Most people always did. It wasn't about arrogance, reflected silently. It was about survival. The world had taught her that those who failed to observe, who didn't anticipate, were the first to fall. Hai would be no different. She finished her lunch, standing with the grace of someone who had been trained to move in unpredictable situations. Every step she took, every glance she cast was precise. The crowd seemed to part naturally around her, and its group narrowed their eyes. They were sizing her up, deciding how to strike, how to assert dominance over the newcomer. Welcomed the challenge. By the end of the day, had walked the halls, observed every corner and catalogued every clique, every likely threat, every potential ally. She had smiled politely, spoken minimally, and yet made an impression on everyone around her. Some students felt an odd respect, some unease, and some, particularly in her minions, a simmering irritation. The day's lessons ended, and the final bell rang, signaling the close of first day. Most students would have felt relief. Most students would have wanted to go home and escape the energy of the school. But she was ready. She had anticipated the day's challenges and understood that tomorrow things might escalate. And they would. Because no one at High knew it yet, but the new girl was not just a student. She was a force trained, calm, lethal if necessary, and unafraid to stand when the world tried to push her down. The arrival of Ward was more than a simple transfer. It was the beginning of a change, a shift in power dynamics, a test of strength, a battle waiting to happen. And for the first time in a while, smiled faintly to herself. She was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, High felt no different to most students, yet something in the air had shifted. Ward, calm and composed, walked through the crowded hallways as if she belonged. Her backpack rested lightly on one shoulder, her eyes scanning without starring. Every movement was intentional, every glance subtle as she catalogued faces, gestures, and potential threats. She was learning quickly. By the second day, she understood the unspoken rules of High. Who ruled, who followed, who waited for a chance to exploit weakness. Her path inevitably crossed with Briggs and her circle once more. Perched near the lockers with her friends, noticed immediately. The new girl's quiet confidence and self-assured posture sparked something dangerous in, a combination of curiosity, envy, and the instinct to dominate. Leaned toward her friends and whispered sharply, her words carrying a bite that caught without looking. "That quiet one, I think she thinks she's better than us." Her minions giggled nervously, unsure of how to respond, but the tension was unmistakable. Paused briefly at her locker, pretending to be absorbed in organizing her books, yet her awareness of gaze never wavered. She noted the way hands flexed at her sides, the small step forward that suggested she wanted to assert dominance, the quick glances at her friends for support. These were subtle cues most students missed, but had been trained to read them instinctively. She didn't react outwardly. She didn't need to. Observation was enough for now. By mid-morning, the whispers had begun. "She's weird," someone muttered from behind a row of lockers. "I've never seen her before. Bet she's hiding something." Another student laughed quietly, shaking their head. The rumor mill churned, fueled by curiosity and fear, both of which had anticipated. She walked calmly to her next class, English, passing through clusters of students who could not resist staring. And her friends trailed at a distance, eyes locked on her like predators circling prey. It wasn't long before the first confrontation occurred. Accidentally brushed past in the crowded hall. She turned quickly, apologizing politely, "Sorry about that," her voice even calm, almost disarmingly gentle. Smile twisted into a snarl and she stepped forward aggressively. "Watch where you're going, newbie," she snapped. Gaze didn't falter, but her mind catalogued every detail. The tension in shoulders, the slight clench of her fists, the way her friends shifted instinctively to flank her. Leaned closer, attempting to intimidate, and took a subtle step back, a move designed to maintain distance while remaining nonchalant. She didn't flinch, but she didn't escalate. Noticed this, and her smile faltered slightly. Most students would have cowered, but lack of fear unsettled her. It was a dangerous combination. Someone who could defend themselves yet chose not to fight. Unused to such defiance, felt a spark of irritation mixed with challenge. The hallway bell rang, signaling the end of class, but the confrontation lingered in the air. Whispered to her friends, planning something could almost predict. She was careful to remain composed, her every action deliberate, her instincts quietly alert. Students passed by, unaware of the tension, yet could sense the undercurrent of plotting. The group was sizing her up, trying to decide how to assert control, how to teach her a lesson. Of course, anticipated it. Lunch brought another wave of tension. The cafeteria, always a battlefield of social hierarchies, was a cacophony of voices, laughter, and clattering trays. Moved through the crowd with calm precision, carrying her lunch tray. She chose a seat on the edge of the cafeteria, giving herself a clear view of both entrances. The group, already seated nearby, watched her like hawks. Their whispering and glances were meant to unsettle, but its expression remained neutral, unreadable. Nudged one of her friends. "She thinks she can just sit there like she owns the place," she hissed. Gaze flicked toward them for the briefest moment, neutral, unprovoking. Yet's friends exchanged uneasy looks. This girl didn't flinch. She didn't react with anger. She didn't even acknowledge them. And that lack of reaction unnerved them more than confrontation ever could. Had learned long ago that calm was a weapon just as sharp as a fist. After a few minutes, stood, picking up her tray with a deliberate slowness. She approached, every movement dripping with calculated aggression. "You know, new girl," she said loudly enough for her friends to hear, "some people just don't belong here. Maybe you should find somewhere else to sit." Didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deliberate breath, her posture unchanging, and Met's gaze directly. It was in that moment that realized wasn't like anyone she had encountered before. There was no fear in those eyes, no panic, just stillness, focus, and quiet awareness, the kind of presence that made people pause, reassess, and, for the first time, doubt their dominance. His lips curled into a sneer, but the uncertainty had already seated itself in her mind. Was a puzzle, one that could not be solved with intimidation alone. The lunch period ended without incident, and her friends were determined. They whispered to each other, plotting, analyzing movements and expressions. Every step she took through the cafeteria, every glance she cast was catalogued. They underestimated her, but had already anticipated their behavior. She left the cafeteria with her tray, moving calmly to the next class. Students whispered as she passed, some curious, some envious, some scared, but didn't acknowledge them. Her focus remained unbroken. By the time the final bell of the day rang, had walked the halls for the second time, observed every potential threat, every escape route, every social dynamic. She had interacted minimally yet effectively, leaving an impression that was subtle but undeniable. This group had been watching, planning, and growing more frustrated by the minute. The target had been identified. The challenge had been accepted. And fully aware of their intentions, prepared herself for the inevitable encounter that would come after school. An ambush that she already knew was likely, but was ready to face with absolute precision. Because Ward didn't just survive, she thrived on observation, preparation, and control. She had been trained her entire life to anticipate danger and respond with calm efficiency. High, for all its chaos and hierarchy, would be no different. And her friends were merely obstacles, and focus on survival meant she was ready for whatever came next. Tomorrow would test more than courage. It would test skill, reflexes, and instinct. And was ready. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of High, casting long shadows along the hallways as students packed up their belongings and whispered about the day's gossip. Ward moved with the same calm precision she always did, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes scanning the corridors. Every detail mattered: the angle of the lockers, the position of the janitor carts, the number of students clustered in each hallway. She had spent all day observing, and her instincts told her the confrontation would come soon. It came sooner than she expected. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, felt a subtle shift in the air, a tension that told her she wasn't alone. Briggs and her group had shadowed her all afternoon, whispering behind her back, shifting strategically to make sure she noticed their presence without directly engaging yet. Steps remained measured, unhurried, but her mind calculated every option, every possible escape route, every angle from which the attack could come. The ambush began just outside the gym, where the crowded corridors gave way to a quiet corridor often used for deliveries and maintenance access. This group had chosen the spot deliberately, isolated with only a few cameras and no teachers nearby. "Let's see if she can take a little fun," whispered to her friends, the cruel edge in her tone cutting like a knife. Stepped into the corridor, her senses heightened, every nerve alert. She knew what was coming before it happened. Pushed forward first, her hands on shoulders with force meant to intimidate. "Think you're better than us?" she sneered. Eyes met hers calmly, unflinching, betraying nothing. "I didn't do anything to you," replied softly, her voice steady, almost disarming in its neutrality. Lips twisted into a smirk of frustration, the lack of fear enraged her further. "You will," she spat, lunging forward. The first blow came from Trent, his right-hand thug who swung a fist towards Face. It caught her by surprise. She hadn't expected a direct attack so soon. The force of the punch, coupled with the element of surprise, knocked her off balance. Tried to step back to redirect, but the narrow corridor left little room for maneuvering. Her vision blurred, her head spun, and for a terrifying moment she felt herself slipping into darkness. The group circled her like wolves, laughing, taking videos on their phones, confident that their plan had succeeded. Kicked lightly, ensuring she was down. "Is that all you got?" taunted, crouching to mock her. Ears rang from the impact, the world dimmed at the edges, but even lying on the floor she remained aware. Every muscle in her body tensed instinctively. Her father's training surged to the forefront of her mind. Control your fear. Observe your attacker. Wait for the right moment. His mind worked in fractions of a second. She noted the positions of each bully, the angle of their limbs, the weight of their stance. Most teenagers would have panicked, but she had been taught to treat fear as a tool, not a weakness. Even as the group laughed and posed for photos, she assessed which movements would be most effective once she regained control. Time seemed to stretch in the moment, every heartbeat a drum of anticipation. Then came the blow that should have ended it. His friend, a stocky boy named, slammed his hand down on shoulder with enough force to jolt her body. Pain surged through her back and she hit the cold, hard floor, the concrete rough beneath her palms. The laughter of the group echoed off the walls, their triumph complete in their eyes. His body went limp for a moment, her vision darkening further. They thought she was done. They thought she was out cold. But something shifted inside her. A calm fire ignited deep in her core, a trained response to extreme threat. Her breathing slowed, her muscles themselves, and every sense sharpened. Even unconsciousness could not suppress the reflexes she had built since childhood. Her eyes fluttered open, the blur of the room coming back into focus. His group froze, sensing a change in the air, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, but one they instinctively recognized. The prey had become the predator. Rose slowly, her movements smooth and controlled, like a coiled spring ready to release. Her gaze swept across the corridor, measuring distance, analyzing posture, and identifying weaknesses. She didn't speak immediately. She didn't scream. She simply stood, calm, composed, and focused. The laughter of the bullies faltered. Confusion replaced arrogance. Their carefully constructed sense of dominance cracked in the presence of something they didn't understand. Took a step forward, attempting to reassert control. What are you doing?" she stammered, her voice slightly trembling. Eyes met hers without emotion. "I warned you," she said quietly, her voice steady, carrying a weight far heavier than her small frame suggested. "Walk away." It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, a line drawn clearly and unmistakably. But the bullies didn't listen. Lunged first, a mixture of anger and disbelief fueling her attack. His body moved on instinct, precise and efficient. She grabbed S's arm and with a controlled motion flipped her onto the floor, neutralizing her attack without unnecessary force. The other bullies hesitated, unsure how to react. S's control over the situation was absolute. Every movement was deliberate, every strike measured, every block calculated. The hall, once filled with laughter and derision, now echoed with gasps and whispered awe. Students who had been passing by stopped, phones raised instinctively to capture what was unfolding. Eyes remained calm, focused, and unreadable, the trained gaze of someone who had faced danger countless times and emerged unshaken. She had been knocked down, yes, but not defeated. The ambush that had seemed inevitable had now become the stage for a stunning display of skill, control, and quiet fury. In the end, the confrontation was brief but unforgettable, had not sought revenge. She had not attacked unnecessarily. She had defended herself efficiently, leaving the bullies incapacitated without causing permanent harm. The lesson was clear: underestimate her at your own peril, and her friends were stunned, unsure whether to flee, fight, or beg for mercy. Didn't give them time to decide. She had regained her footing and control, and that was all that mattered. As the sound of approaching footsteps signaled the likely arrival of a nearby teacher or passerby, took a step back, her expression still calm. The bullies scrambled, some to their feet, some to escape the hall entirely. Hi, a school built on fear, gossip, and social dominance, had just witnessed something entirely different. The quiet, new girl who had been knocked out cold had risen not just physically, but in authority, command, and presence. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring consequences, would not forget. Her friends would plan again, but had already anticipated this. The ambush had revealed weaknesses, strategies, and potential threats. She had survived. She had proven herself. And most importantly, she had shown the school a truth few were ready to accept. Strength did not always roar. Sometimes it rose quietly, calmly, and decisively in the moment that mattered most. The cold concrete of the hallway pressed against Ward's palms as she slowly pushed herself upright. Pain pulsed through her head and shoulders, the residual shock of the blows she had taken still echoing in her body. Yet beneath the aches and the ringing in her ears, a calm clarity emerged, a switch flipping deep inside her mind, inherited from years of training under her father, a retired Navy SEAL. Where moments ago she had been a helpless target, she was now fully alert, fully in control. Her eyes opened, unblinking, scanning the corridor with surgical precision. Briggs and her group froze in place, sensing an unnatural shift in the air. The laughter that had filled the hallway moments ago was gone, replaced by silence tinged with confusion and fear. S's body moved with perfect posture, her spine straight, shoulders squared, her breathing steady, deliberate. She was no longer reacting. She was assessing, calculating, and preparing. Time seemed to slow around her. Every movement, every twitch, every imbalance among her attackers became visible in detail. Trying to reassert herself, stepped forward aggressively, her fists raised. Trent, still smirking seconds earlier, now hesitated, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Even the others, who had been so confident, now shifted nervously, suddenly aware that the girl they had knocked out cold was not the victim they imagined. S's mind replayed every lesson she had learned. Observe first, strike only when necessary, control the chaos, neutralize the threat efficiently. This was not anger. This was instinct refined into lethal precision. Years of drills, of endless repetitions in simulation and discipline, had trained her body to act even when unconscious or off balance. Now fully awake, fully aware, she became the force they hadn't anticipated. She spoke, her voice low and even, carrying authority that made the bullies pause. Walk away. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a command. Her calmness, her control, radiated a presence that made even hesitate. Most teenagers could not comprehend that quiet intensity. Smirk faltered, replaced with confusion and a flicker of fear. She had thought was fragile, broken, defeated. She had been very wrong. Lunged first, her movements sharp but predictable, a raw display of frustration and teenage aggression. S's body reacted instantly, sidestepping smoothly, her hands moving with practiced precision. She grabbed S's arm and used leverage to flip her onto the floor. Hit the concrete with a thud, wind knocked out of her, stunned by the speed and fluidity of movements. The remaining bullies froze, uncertainty replacing confidence. Trent made a hesitant move forward, trying to capitalize on fall, pivoted, blocking his advance with a subtle step and a strong, controlled push that sent him stumbling back. She didn't strike to harm unnecessarily. She neutralized. Her control over the confrontation was absolute, her movements a combination of speed, balance, and instinct. Students passing nearby stopped, some raising their phones in awe, capturing the unexpected scene of the quiet girl who had suddenly become the dominant presence. His gaze swept across the hallway. Every bully's position, weight distribution, and potential movement had been assessed. She could feel the tension radiating from them, the nervous energy of those who realized, too late, that they had misjudged her completely. Each step she took, each movement of her hands was deliberate. This was control. This was mastery over chaos. Her breathing remained even, almost meditative. Every inhale and exhale was timed, measured, a rhythm that fueled her focus. Scrambled to her feet trying to regroup, but anticipated her movements, sidestepping and redirecting her with ease. Trent, now more cautious, tried to circle around but blocked him with a simple yet effective maneuver, leveraging his own momentum against him. In moments, the entire group had been disarmed of their confidence. The hallway, once filled with laughter and mockery, was now thick with tension. Students who had been passing by watched in awe, whispering in disbelief. "Did she just?" one muttered. Another whispered, "She's incredible." Did not allow herself to be distracted by the attention. Every second was focused on maintaining control, neutralizing the threat without crossing into unnecessary aggression. She had been trained to protect, not punish. His eyes darted toward the exits, searching for an escape, but anticipated this too. She subtly positioned herself between the girl and any potential path of retreat, ensuring complete control of the corridor. "Stop! Walk away," she repeated, calm and steady. Her voice, though quiet, carried an authority that left no room for debate. His group finally understood that the game was over. They had awakened a force beyond their reckoning. Even as the tension reached its peak, his movements remained fluid, precise, efficient. One by one, she disarmed the remaining bullies, using balance, leverage, and redirection rather than brute force. Each move was calculated, a demonstration of skill rather than rage. Within moments, the group had lost all ability to coordinate, their confidence shattered by a girl they had underestimated. The scene was surreal for everyone present. A girl who had been knocked out moments earlier now dominated her attackers with a calmness and efficiency that no one had expected. Students stopped in the hallway, some frozen, some recording, all in awe of what they were witnessing. His presence radiated control, authority, and precision. High, a school built on fear, gossip, and social hierarchies, had just encountered something entirely new. A quiet, unassuming girl who could command a situation with unmatched skill. By the time the teacher's footsteps echoed from the end of the hall, signaling that help was on the way, had restored order, and her friends had been neutralized, not humiliated but controlled. No excessive force, no unnecessary injury, just precision and efficiency. She took a deep breath, her body still tensed, ready for any further attempts at confrontation. The bullies, humbled and shaken, retreated as soon as they were able, leaving standing alone, calm and composed. In that moment, the truth was undeniable. Ward was not just the new girl. She was someone who could assess, anticipate, and control chaos with deadly precision. High had underestimated her, as so many others had before. But she had risen fully awake, fully aware, and fully prepared to take control of any situation that came her way. And as the teacher's voice finally echoed around the corridor, calling for an explanation, remained calm, her gaze unflinching, ready to face whatever consequences would come next. The seal switch had flipped, and High would never see her the same way again. The tension in the hallway had shifted completely. What had started as a casual, humiliating ambush for Ward had become a demonstration of total control. Briggs and her group, once confident and menacing, now hesitated, frozen in shock at the precision and calm displayed by the girl they had thought they could intimidate. Every student passing by had stopped, their whispers and wide eyes reflecting disbelief. Phones were raised, recording, but even the lens couldn't fully capture the aura of controlled power that emanated from. Trent, still staggering slightly from his calculated push moments earlier, tried to step forward, attempting to regain the upper hand. His movements were uncertain, jerky, lacking coordination. Watched him, every micro-movement recorded in her mind. She didn't attack immediately. She assessed the distance between him and the wall, the weight on his legs, his center of gravity. One slight misstep, one sudden twitch, and his momentum would be her advantage. She let him advance a few steps, forcing him to commit before acting. In a blink, catching his arm and using his forward momentum to unbalance him, Trent tumbled sideways, hitting the floor with a thud, stunned and humiliated in the moment. Seeing her friend taken down so effortlessly, lunged in reckless anger, but was already anticipating the move. She pivoted, catching his arm and twisting her off balance. With a controlled motion, she flipped onto the cold concrete, leaving her winded and unable to rise immediately. The rest of the group watched, fear replacing the arrogance that had fueled their initial attack. His movements were fluid, deliberate, and precise, almost like a choreographed dance. Every block, push, and maneuver had purpose. She did not strike to harm unnecessarily, she neutralized threats. A stocky boy who had been the most aggressive of his followers made a sudden lunge toward her, anticipated the motion and leveraged his weight against him. Stumbled, then fell to the floor in a heap, his confidence shattered. Within seconds, the group's ability to coordinate or act as a unit dissolved entirely. Her breathing remained even, measured, almost meditative despite the intensity of the fight. Every inhale, every exhale fueled focus and control. It was as if the chaos around her had slowed and she moved with clarity that left no room for error. A school accustomed to bullying and hierarchy, had never seen a display like this. The students watching through the hallways whispered in awe. "Did she just?" one muttered. "She's unreal," another replied. Moved through the group with precision. She neutralized one bully after another, not with brute force but with calculated leverage and timing. She pushed, twisted, and redirected, turning every aggressive action from the attackers into a self-defeating motion. By the time she was done, each member of his group had been pinned, off balance, or placed safely out of immediate threat. The result was complete dominance. The fight ended without a single unnecessary strike, but the message was unmistakable. Ward was in control. The silence in the hallway was thick, broken only by the heavy breathing of and her friends. The students who had been recording the scene were frozen, phones shaking slightly in their hands. The air felt charged with disbelief and awe, stood in the center of the hallway, composed, calm, and fully aware of every movement around her. No one dared approach. No one dared challenge. The quiet new girl had not only survived but had mastered the situation with effortless skill. Attempted to speak, her voice trembling slightly. You can't just," her words faltered. Gaze met hers directly, unwavering. "I warned you. You didn't listen," she said, her tone neutral, matter-of-fact. Smirk faltered, replaced by confusion and fear. She had never met anyone who could dismantle her group in seconds without rage, without panic, without excessive violence. Skill was undeniable, and her calmness made her all the more formidable. Even the students who had observed the fight from a distance could sense the power in her presence. They whispered among themselves, sharing a mix of disbelief and awe. Some compared her movements to professional athletes, others to military precision, but didn't flinch, didn't boast, and didn't celebrate. She simply assessed the scene one last time, ensuring that every threat had been neutralized. She had control, and the bullies understood it. The hallway, once dominated by fear and intimidation, now echoed with a new order. The quiet girl had demonstrated authority, skill, and control. The group, humbled and shaken, scrambled to regain composure, their arrogance replaced by uncertainty. Their carefully orchestrated plan to humiliate had failed spectacularly. Instead of prey, they had encountered a predator, calm, precise, and unshakable. finally took a step back, releasing her focus just enough to allow the adrenaline to ebb. The bullies, still on the floor or recovering their balance, slowly realized that they were entirely at her mercy. They didn't flee because she threatened them with violence, but because they instinctively understood that resistance was futile. Ward had turned a chaotic ambush into a display of skill, composure, and authority that no one in the hallway would forget. And as the distant sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor, likely a teacher or a student assistant responding to the commotion's focus shifted seamlessly. She was ready to face any consequences with the same calm efficiency she had displayed in the fight. There was no fear, no hesitation. She had neutralized the threat, ensured control, and protected herself without excessive force. For Hai, the consequences were already unfolding. The bullies' reputation was shattered, their confidence broken, and whispers of Ward's incredible skill had already begun to spread. Students who had once ignored her or dismissed her were now watching closely, wondering who she truly was and whether anyone could challenge her. For her part, remained composed, aware that the fight was over but that its ripple effects would last far longer. This was more than a simple act of self-defense. It was a statement, had proven that calm, focus, and skill could dismantle arrogance and aggression in seconds. She had demonstrated control over chaos, precision over recklessness, and awareness over ignorance. Hai had witnessed the rise of someone entirely different, someone who commanded respect not through fear, but through unmatched ability and quiet authority. As and her friends retreated down the hallway, nursing bruised egos and newfound fear, stood alone in the corridor, composed, calm, and unshaken. The students who had watched in awe began to whisper to each other, spreading the tale of the quiet new girl who had been knocked out cold, yet had risen to dominate an entire group of bullies in seconds. She had not sought revenge. She had not sought attention. She had simply acted, efficiently and decisively, proving that strength is measured not by volume or aggression, but by skill, control, and the ability to act when it matters most. In that moment, Ward became more than a new girl at Hai. She became a force of quiet authority, a lesson in precision and calm, and a warning that no one should underestimate someone who had been trained to survive, to adapt, and to act decisively under pressure. The fight had ended. The message had been sent, and composed and in control was ready for whatever came next. The echo of hurried footsteps grew louder as Hai's security personnel approached the hallway. Ward remained calm, her stance relaxed but alert, every muscle still subtly coiled, ready to respond if necessary. Briggs and her group, who had just been neutralized with surgical precision, scrambled to their feet, faces pale and expressions a mixture of fear and humiliation. The bullies' carefully constructed world of dominance had crumbled in mere seconds, replaced by an uneasy silence. A security officer rounded the corner, a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the scene. A group of students sprawled on the floor, others standing in awe, and Ward, calm, composed, and completely in control. "What happened here?" he barked, his voice carrying authority but betraying a hint of confusion. Students quickly began murmuring explanations, phones raised, footage captured in real time. The witnesses spoke in quick, overlapping bursts, explaining that the bullies had ambushed, trying to humiliate her after school. Security officers exchanged glances, scanning the recorded videos on student phones. Every clip showed the sequence clearly. Had been knocked out briefly, but upon regaining consciousness, she had neutralized her attackers without unnecessary force, demonstrating control and restraint. The evidence left little doubt as to who had started the conflict and who had ended it. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the school. Teachers gathered, administrators arrived, and whispers carried through every hallway. Students who had previously underestimated now stared at her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "Did you see that?" one student whispered. "She took them all down like it was nothing," another replied. By the time the principal appeared, the hallway had turned into a buzz of anticipation, excitement, and a little fear. Remained calm as the adults arrived. The principal, a middle-aged woman known for her strict but fair approach, surveyed the scene carefully, and her friends stood, shame and anger etched into their expressions. "I want to hear exactly what happened," the principal demanded, gesturing toward the students. Spoke first, her voice steady, factual, and devoid of embellishment. "They cornered me after school. They attacked first. I defended myself and ensured they could not harm me further. That's all." Her words were concise, honest, and remarkably mature for someone her age. The principal glanced at the footage on a student's phone, eyes widening slightly as she realized the full sequence. The evidence was undeniable, and her followers had orchestrated a deliberate attack and had responded with precision, defending herself without retaliation or excessive aggression. The principal nodded slowly, clearly impressed by his composure. Parents were called in as the news traveled quickly. Within hours, his mother and father had stormed into the school furious, demanding an explanation for their daughter's humiliation. His father arrived calmly, unflustered, his military bearing immediately setting the tone for any conversation. He explained his daughter's upbringing, discipline, training, and a principle ingrained deeply, to act decisively and efficiently, only when necessary and always with control. His calm presence reassured administrators and gave credibility to his account. The fallout was swift and thorough, and her friends faced suspension, a formal warning, and mandatory counseling sessions. The school's administration used the incident as an opportunity to implement stricter anti-bullying policies and awareness programs. Teachers held assemblies, reminding students that intimidation, harassment, and attacks would no longer be tolerated. His role in the incident was emphasized not as a boastful victory, but as an example of self-defense and controlled response. Meanwhile, the student body was abuzz with awe and admiration. Peers whispered about her skill, composure, and courage. Rumors spread about her training, her calmness under pressure, and the fact that she had neutralized a group of bullies with efficiency and precision. Students who had ignored her now approached cautiously, curious to know more. Some wanted to befriend her, others merely wanted to observe. All understood one thing clearly: Ward was not someone to be underestimated. Despite the attention, remained humble. She did not seek recognition or revenge. She did not gloat over the fallen bullies. Instead, she focused on her studies, her training, and quietly building relationships with students who showed genuine kindness and respect. Her father's lessons had always emphasized humility. Strength is not about showing off, but about acting decisively when it matters most, and embodied that principle perfectly. The media of the school, students with phones and social media accounts, began spreading footage and accounts of the incident. Story became an overnight sensation in the school community, inspiring both admiration and fear. Some students joked, some marveled, but all acknowledged her abilities. Teachers used the incident as a learning moment, discussing conflict resolution, self-control, and the importance of standing up for oneself in a safe and measured way. By the end of the day, High had shifted. Social hierarchies had been disrupted. Dominance was broken, replaced with uncertainty and humiliation. Once the quiet new girl had become a central figure, respected, cautious, and undeniably capable. Even those who feared her could not deny the message she had sent. Confidence, skill, and calm control can dismantle even the most aggressive threats in seconds. Parents continued to arrive, expressing concern for their own children, while administrators worked to ensure no further incidents occurred. His father remained calm, quietly observing the aftermath, proud of his daughter but unwilling to let the attention go to her head. Herself walked through the corridors with quiet confidence, aware of the whispers but not seeking them. She had faced the challenge, neutralized the threat, and now turned her focus to the future, learning, growing, and navigating her new environment with the same discipline and focus she had always been taught. In the following days, and her group struggled to regain credibility. Students who had previously feared them now approached them cautiously, aware of their recent humiliation. Reputation only grew as a result. Teachers who had initially been skeptical of her quiet demeanor now praised her maturity and composure. The incident became a case study in self-defense, discipline, and controlled response, and Ward's name became synonymous with all three. By the time the week ended, Hai had absorbed the lesson. Bullying and intimidation were no longer tolerated, and underestimating someone, especially the quiet new girl, could have consequences far beyond what anyone imagined. Had not only defended herself but had reshaped the social dynamics of the school, proving that strength, discipline, and focus can alter the balance of power without unnecessary violence. As walked past the now empty hallway where the fight had occurred, she felt a subtle sense of accomplishment, tempered with humility. She had survived. She had defended herself. And she had done so with control, precision, and composure. The school would remember the day the quiet new girl rose, the day the Navy SEAL trained instincts within her surfaced, and the day she quietly, efficiently, and decisively sent a message to everyone who thought they could push her down. The hallways of High had quieted considerably by the following week, but the echoes of Ward's showdown with Briggs and her group lingered in every whispered conversation. Students who had once dismissed her as the quiet new girl now looked at her with a mixture of awe, respect, and curiosity. Her reputation had grown almost overnight, yet remained calm, composed, and unassuming, refusing to let the attention distract her from her studies or her disciplined routines. Still, the incident had left many questions unanswered. How had a seemingly ordinary teenage girl neutralized multiple bullies so efficiently? How had she regained consciousness and control after being knocked out? Rumors swirled like wildfire through classrooms, cafeterias, and social media. Some claimed she had martial arts training, others whispered about secret family connections, and a few dared to suggest she might have had military experience herself. The truth, was far more complicated, and far more extraordinary than anyone suspected. It wasn't long before her closest allies in the school began to notice subtle clues. Her posture, the way she observed people before speaking, her controlled breathing, and the precision in her movements all hinted at a background steeped in discipline and training. One student, a member of the debate team, noted quietly to a friend, "She doesn't just react, she calculates. Every movement, every word, it's all deliberate." Others nodded, noticing the same patterns. Even students who had previously feared her now approached with cautious curiosity, eager to understand the mystery behind her calm efficiency. Herself had been cautious. She had come to High to experience a normal school environment, to learn, grow, and navigate teenage life without unnecessary drama. But the attack had forced her to reveal a fraction of her true self. Her father, a retired Navy SEAL, had trained her since childhood in self-defense, strategy, situational awareness, and calm under pressure. Those skills, once secret and confined to private drills, had become publicly visible in the fight that had shaken the school. It was during a faculty meeting that the truth began to emerge. Teachers had been discussing the incident, reviewing the student-recorded footage, and considering the best way to maintain school safety while addressing the social dynamics that had been disrupted. History and training came up in conversation. One teacher, aware of her father's military background, remarked, "Her reactions, her awareness, her composure, this isn't typical teenage behavior. She's had training. Serious training." Another nodded, adding, "It explains how she handled herself so perfectly after being knocked out. Most kids wouldn't have even recovered fast enough to defend themselves." The revelation spread slowly among the students. Parents who came to discuss the incident with school officials began asking about its background. Her father, ever calm and authoritative, explained her upbringing. Early mornings, strict discipline, martial arts, and tactical training designed to instill self-control and awareness. He emphasized that had been taught to act decisively only when necessary and always with minimal force, a principle she had followed flawlessly during the hallway confrontation. As word reached Briggs and her social circle, their shock deepened. They had assumed was just another student, someone they could intimidate and humiliate. Instead, they had discovered that she was trained, disciplined, and unshakable, a reality that fundamentally altered their perception. Who had once ruled the social hierarchy through fear and aggression, now realized she had been completely outmatched. Her arrogance had been dismantled by strategy, calm, and skill rather than brute strength. Even among the wider student body, her reputation shifted. Students who had once ignored her now sought her advice on self-defense, confidence, and strategy. Teachers used her example in lessons on resilience, personal safety, and the consequences of bullying. The story of the quiet new girl who had been knocked out but emerged victorious became legendary, a case study in composure and calculated action. Did not relish the attention. She continued to move quietly through the hallways, observing, learning, and maintaining the same disciplined focus that had defined her life long before high. One day, a small group of students approached her after class. One of them began cautiously, How did you do it? How did you stay so calm?" Eyes met theirs, her expression serene but firm. "I was trained to observe, to anticipate, and to act only when necessary," she explained simply. "Fear is natural, but it doesn't have to control you. Preparation and awareness give you options, that's all." The students listened, enraptured, some scribbling notes, others nodding in silent understanding. As the weeks passed, his influence quietly expanded. She never sought to dominate or intimidate others, yet her presence alone changed the dynamics of high. Students who had once acted aggressively now thought twice before attempting harassment or bullying. Teachers noted a reduction in conflicts, attributing some of the change to calm authority and example. Even Briggs, who had tried to maintain her status, found herself facing whispered warnings and cautious glances, a subtle reminder of dominance in the hallway confrontation. The truth of his background also began to surface in other ways. Parents who met her father learned about his Navy SEAL career, his strict discipline, and the skills he had instilled in from a young age. They understood that the fight in the hallway was not a random act of aggression, but the culmination of years of deliberate preparation, training, and instinct. Herself never flaunted this information. It emerged naturally through conversations, incidents, and the inevitable curiosity of those around her. By the end of the semester, High had shifted irreversibly. Ward had transformed from the quiet new girl into a figure of respect and caution. The incident in the hallway was remembered not as a moment of violence, but as a demonstration of discipline, skill, and personal control. Students who had once underestimated her now approached with respect, admiration, or careful caution. Teachers referenced her as an example of calm under pressure, composure in the face of conflict, and effective self-defense. And through it all remained herself, disciplined, observant, and focused. She had no desire for fame or recognition. She simply lived according to the principles instilled in her from childhood: awareness, preparation, and measured action. Her presence reminded everyone that true strength was not loud or boastful, but precise, controlled, and effective when it mattered most. As walked the halls one afternoon, now greeted with smiles and quiet nods from students who had previously feared or dismissed her, she understood the impact of the truth emerging. Her skills, her training, and her disciplined approach had not only defended her, but had subtly reshaped the social dynamics of the school. High would never see her as just a quiet new girl again. She was something far more formidable, a student who commanded respect not through intimidation, but through mastery, control, and quiet strength. The weeks after the hallway confrontation passed in a surreal combination of quiet observation and shifting school dynamics. High had changed, subtly but irrevocably, under the influence of Ward. Students who had once relied on bullying and intimidation now approached interactions with caution, aware that the quiet new girl was more than she appeared. Walked through the hallways with her usual calm composure, never seeking attention, yet commanding it effortlessly simply by being herself. Her presence inspired a mixture of respect and caution. Teachers noticed a tangible drop in conflicts among students, whispered warnings, rather than verbal or physical confrontations, now maintained order. His influence, though quiet, was undeniable. She never intervened unless necessary, yet everyone instinctively understood that she could. Rumors spread of her discipline, skill, and composure, painting a picture of a student unlike any other at High. Even those who had initially feared her were drawn to her quiet confidence, seeking guidance on self-discipline, awareness, and resilience. Briggs, once the undisputed queen of social dominance, struggled to regain footing. Her arrogance had been replaced with uncertainty, and her carefully curated group of followers now regarded with a mixture of envy and respect. Attempts to reassert control were met with subtle defiance, wary whispers, or quiet glances from classmates who had witnessed skill firsthand. High had learned a vital lesson. Real power does not come from intimidation or loud words. It comes from discipline, skill, and control. Herself remained focused on what mattered most to her, learning, growing, and maintaining the discipline instilled in her by her father. She continued to rise early for training routines, engage in academic studies with precision, and quietly observe the social dynamics of the school. She had no need for recognition, no desire for popularity. Her satisfaction came from mastery of herself, her environment, and her ability to act decisively when necessary. Students, however, couldn't help but notice. Whispered conversations about her exploits in the hallway continued for weeks. Her calm demeanor, even after being knocked out and immediately taking control of the fight, became legendary. Classmates began referring to her as the girl who never panics, or the one who sees everything. Teachers, too, cited her example in discussions about self-control, conflict resolution, and personal responsibility. Had, without trying, become a standard for resilience and mastery. The story of that fateful day became part of High's lore. New students, unaware of the specifics, were quickly told about the girl who had faced multiple attackers, regained consciousness, and neutralized the situation with calm precision. The legend grew with each retelling. Ward was the quiet new girl, but also the one whose discipline, focus, and skill made her untouchable. Even those who had once doubted her or sought to harm her now treated her with respect, their assumptions shattered by the truth of her abilities. His father occasionally visited, watching with quiet pride as his daughter navigated a complex social environment with the same principles he had taught her. "Control yourself first, control the situation second," he reminded her during one visit, nodded, her calm expression unchanged. "I understand," she replied simply. The lesson had been lived, not merely learned. The hallway confrontation had been her proving ground, and she had emerged not only victorious but unshakable, embodying the principles her father had instilled since childhood. Parents and administrators began to view differently as well. She was no longer simply a new student, but an example of composure, discipline, and courage. Her calm response to aggression, her ability to assess threats and neutralize them without excessive force, and her strategic thinking became a model for how students could handle conflict responsibly. The legacy she began to create was one of respect earned through skill and control, not intimidation or fear. Even social hierarchies shifted. Students who had once sought dominance through bullying or manipulation now sought quiet guidance. Her presence created an unspoken standard. Strength was measured not by loud aggression, but by mastery, awareness, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. Never demanded recognition, but the respect she earned reshaped High in subtle but profound ways. The bullies and her friends had learned a lesson that would remain with them. Their attempts to dominate had been undone in seconds by someone they had underestimated. Humiliation, fear, and newfound respect tempered their arrogance. Some sought redemption quietly, others retreated socially, and all learned to approach conflict with greater care. His actions had shifted not just the outcome of one fight but the culture of the school itself. In quiet moments reflected on her journey. She had entered High hopping for a normal experience, never intending to reveal the extent of her training. Yet circumstances had forced her to act, to defend herself, and to set boundaries. The experience had not changed who she was but had reinforced her principles: preparation, awareness, calmness, and decisive action. The fight had been a test, and she had passed with the discipline she had cultivated since childhood. By the end of the semester, legend was firmly established. New students were warned to respect her, teachers cited her example, and her peers regarded her with a combination of admiration and caution. She had become a living demonstration of resilience, discipline, and tactical awareness. Hai had learned that strength was not always visible, that calm control could be more powerful than aggression, and that one student, quietly disciplined, could change the dynamics of an entire school. And so, Ward continued her life at Hai, calm, composed, and quietly influential. She remained focused on her studies, her training, and her personal growth, never seeking recognition but always earning it. The hallway confrontation, the ambush, the quick neutralization of threats, and the revelation of her background became stories passed along with awe and respect. Had earned her place, not through fear or aggression, but through mastery, discipline, and quiet strength. In every hallway she walked, in every classroom she entered, the legacy of that day followed her. Students whispered, parents nodded in approval, and teachers admired her composure. Had turned a moment of crisis into a lesson in strategy, control, and self-confidence. The quiet new girl was no longer just new, she was a symbol, a benchmark, and an unforgettable force of calm, decisive strength. Her journey had come full circle, from a cautious, observant student entering a new school to a disciplined, tactically aware young woman who had faced threats head-on and emerged not just unscathed but respected, admired, and legendary. Hai would remember the name Ward, not just for her fight, but for the quiet authority, discipline, and respect she carried with her every day. And as she walked down the hall one final time that day, smiled subtly to herself, knowing she had earned her place, not through arrogance, not through intimidation, but through focus, precision, and the quiet strength that would define her forever.